everyone, this is Emanuel and Thomas here from our studios, and today is live stream day. It is Academy of Shred episode 270, if we count in the Academies of Tone, obviously.
Yeah.
How are you doing, everyone? Great to see you here, and especially great to see you, Thomas. How's it going?
Yeah. It's, everything is fine. It's summertime. I'm enjoying my live concerts. I did play a gig with Alex Beirut and had a lot of fun with a 2 guitar player setup. Today is a very special day as we have Slash's 60th birthday. And I will do a full episode on Slash next week in my live stream with Manuel Bastian as a guest and tons of Marshall heads, of course, signature heads, and, you know, the stuff that Slash was using. Yeah, that's going on my side.
That sounds super interesting. I mean, you know, people usually associate me more with like more heavier music and technical music, but Slash is one of my all-time favorite guitar players. And I know when like, let me explain it. Give me a minute. When I was younger, when I was starting out with the electric guitar, basically my two heroes were Kirk Hammett from Metallica and Slash from Guns N' Roses. That's what you do when you grow up in the 2010s and 2000s and start playing guitar, right? These are the usual guys to be inspired by, I'd say. Anyway, so he was one of my favorite guitar players still. You know, I think I could pull out, if you give me Les Paul, I could pull out so many Slash licks. Anyway, he came to Bremen with his solo project, so Slash and Miles Kennedy, and the Conspirators was named at that time. And they were here in Bremen, which is kind of unusual because usually bigger acts, they go to Hamburg or Hanover. Bremen is not the go-to spot really. However, they came here, they had a gig. Obviously, I was there with my friends. We came early, we were in the first row, and then we saw this amazing show, and we were overwhelmed. We were like 14, 15 years old, and there was Slash, 3 meters ahead of us. Unreal, yeah. And then after the gig, it was a club venue, so it wasn't Guns N' Roses, right? It was like 3,000 capacity, sold out. After the gig, we were waiting in front of the venue because we were hoping to see Slash there. So we waited there, and then suddenly a lady came out. I think he brought her from the States, actually, because heavy American accent, and then starting to talk in English, that we were supposed to do a row and Slash would come out and sign some stuff. So yeah, it was like 4 a.m. I had to go to school next morning, but we didn't care. so we were waiting in that row, and then it was my turn, and I was so nervous. I gave him the new album that just came out. It was called Apocalyptic Love. Gave him the album. I was stumbling like, you are my favorite guitar player. So it sounded like that. And then, this was such a badass move. Signing the CD, he looked up and said, "And you are mine." I was so excited. Next day in school, I would tell everyone that I'm the favorite guitar player of Slash. At that time, internet was new, so I thought he'd see my videos on Facebook or something, but obviously was just joking. Well, this was so amazing. Anyway, that's my Slash story here.
Yeah, what a cool move. I think it's very important to encourage young people. At my last gig with Alex, I had a super young girl, and in the break, she came and asked for a song to play. And then when I mentioned, yes, we do it, and she was so excited. It's like, it's important. It's so important. It means a lot more than we think as the older guys to a younger person. Yeah.
It has been 15 years, still remember this, as it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyway, Slash is using cabs and amps live.
Yeah. We all do.
Actually, we all do, in a way or another. But there are multiple ways to use a cab. So, like the obvious thing, like see my studio, right? I have these cabs here. Plug in my amplifier, turn it up, and then boom, playing. But there are also other solutions as well. So, for example, this one over here, which is a product that you designed, Thomas.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, I quickly give the people a quick explanation. Like maybe there's some beginners here, they don't really know what is an impulse response and things like that. So very, very quick. A cabinet is super important for a guitar tone, right? This is what your amplifier is going into. The amplifier does a lot of stuff, but it doesn't do noise, right? It just defines how the noise is. In the end, it gives the power. It does have, it has preamps, and it has a power amp, right? And this is basically what then powers the cabinet. Guitar cabinets are mostly passive devices, so you need to have an amp like this one, which gives power to the cabinet. If you don't do that, you're not gonna have any noise. And then there's a noise of the cab. Now, when someone's playing live, the cab is 100% going to be mic'd up, right? When you hear a cabinet tone, a guitar cabinet tone on an album, it has to be mic'd up. So not only the cab is important, but actually the microphone placement, the microphone that you're using, the angle, the distance, the room it is in. There's so many details to that. That's the one thing to get a guitar tone. The second thing is to use an impulse response. Now we could go very deep into this and explain what an impulse response is. Let's make this beginner friendly. An impulse response, let's say, is something like a virtual cabinet, right? So it has to do with capturing the sound of the room, the reverberation time, and things like that. It's a very complex process to get a good IR. Well, Thomas knows a lot about it, so
I can give you a 30 seconds. What is an impulse response? Well, basically, it is the sound of a mic'd up cab, because you use a mic in front of a cabinet and your impulse is nothing but the frequency response that you get from the combination of the cabinet and the microphone. And the technology is called convolution technology. So what's sent out is a spike of basically only one sample. It sounds like knack, that's it. And in that very short spike, there are all frequency from the lowest to the highest, from whatever 20 to 20 kilohertz. And what you get back through the cabinet and the microphone is the information of the sound of the cabinet, and that is kind of stored in the impulse, which is that spike, that short event response, what you get out of your cabinet microphone combination. And convolution is using that information, applying to the signal. So that's the virtual cabinet simulator, but using a real speaker inside the cabinet with a microphone, wherever it's been placed, whatever speaker it was. But this is how you create an impulse response. So it all goes back to a cabinet and a microphone.
Well, that was a very, very good explanation. I couldn't do any better. So I would now pull out all the things that I learned at university and make it complicated, but that was perfect. So yeah, basically, impulse response, you can imagine trying to digitally capture the sound of a cabinet.
Yeah,
That's
exactly
really what it is, right?
Yeah.
Now, those are the two worlds that we want to talk about today. So you've seen a song in the beginning that I've recorded and written and done with a cabinet, with impulse responses, everything, just to have a comparison. And I'll deep dive into that later. But now we have Thomas here. So this is a great chance to talk about a couple of things that maybe we want to have a second perspective on, or that I can't talk too much about. So Thomas, first of all, you have designed so many cabs in your time at Hughes and Kettner, in your time at BluGuitar, right? And I know that you're a passionate collector of, certain
speakers.
yeah, certain gimmicks of that world as well. So, can you maybe tell us a little bit, with all this experience of also having designed, by the way, impulse responses and devices that load that, what are you using live?
Live, I do use a combination of a real cab for myself on stage, which is the FatCab. It's a 1x12 cabinet loaded with my own BluGuitar speaker. And it is an oversized 1x12 cabinet. So it tries to give me the sound of a 4x12, because I have to lug around the gear myself. I do have a 4x12 sitting behind of me, which I was using in my early days. Mm-hmm. But for me, I get yelled at because even with me and my FatCab, I'm too loud on stage. And this with 4x12 is even louder. And not as good to be controlled. With a 1x12 FatCab, I can have this behind me from the side of the stage, find a place where the sound guy is not too annoyed. And for me, not using in-ears, I have a perfect sound on stage. That's my monitor sound. And what I'm using to go into the PA system is the BluBOX, which is set to the Stack 1970, which is exactly this cabinet. The Stack 70 is a full stack Marshall cabinet, my favorite cabinet that I own since I was maybe 20 or 19. I have the angled top cabinet and the bottom cabinet. And the funny thing about this 4x12 is it is a bass rig, or it was a bass rig, Marshall. And the resonance frequency is 55 hertz, not 75 hertz. And there's the magic. When you listen on the BluBOX, there is something about the Stack 70 which gives you a ballsier sound and a bit more room in the mids. And that's exactly what I'm looking for. But I know a lot of metal guys prefer other cabinets. For instance, the Stack 67, which is using greenback speakers, 20 watt, 75 hertz, which is a speaker that Eddie Van Halen was using, for instance, as well in the early days, the Brown sound. And then, of course, there are other cabinets like Metal V30, which is obviously a Mesa. Yeah, which is the classic. In this picture here, we can see the cabinets which I put inside the BluBOX, and most of them I own myself. Some of them belong to friends of mine who are collectors. I'm the vintage guy. I have a huge collection of vintage speakers, and all I know is if the cabinet is wrong or the impulse response which comes from a cabinet, the whole thing is wrong. I mean, it's at least 50% of the sound, and it's the last part in the signal path before you can feel the tone or you hear the tone. The EQing, which is happening inside an amp, is very broad. But all the resonances on a membrane inside a cabinet these are so complex. To me, the frequency response curve looks like the Alps, or like a nice mountain pyramid with many hills and valleys, and very, very complex. And this defines, in the end, the tone more to me than maybe even the amp. So for me, cabinet is it's so important. I'm not saying the most important, but it's so important, equally important as your guitar and the amp.
Yeah. So a couple of comments I want to make. First of all, I'm 100% with you. The cabinet is it's invaluable. Everyone's talking about, like such details, like, which pick are you using, what strings are you using, what guitar, what pickups. And I love all of this. It's super important, right? What amp are you using? I have this amp here, obviously. Like, the amp also very important. You're not gonna get a 5150 sound with a Fender amp.
No.
So all of this, it matters, but there's little talk about the importance of a cabinet.
Yeah.
While it's so important, it's like, like the tires on a car. Like, everyone's talking about the engine and the chassis, and if it's if it's all-wheel drive or rear drive, right? Things like that. What if you don't have tires? It's not gonna move. Right, the cabinet is kind of this kind of a thing in the signal chain.
Right.
Nothing's gonna move without it. So I'm 100% with you. Second thing, this is a super smart setup. So actually, when you're playing live, you're doing both. And I want to elaborate a little bit on this, because when I'm talking to my students at university, or guitar students, people just that are coming to me and ask me questions about this. Because this is such an overwhelming topic. Guitar, everyone's just gonna buy the guitar that he likes the look of, that likes the feel of, and that's it. But with amplifiers and cabinets and everything like that, usually it's a mess for beginners. And this kind of sums up best of both worlds. So I always tell people that when I'm here in my studio, you know, I have these special walls. I have all my absorbers. There's no reverb in here. It sounds super dry. This is perfect. When I'm plugging into a cabinet, I'm just playing. It sounds massive. It is just so good. And usually, you know, when I'm playing with a cabinet here, what I do before I start doing what I intended to do, I just do chugging like chunk 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 for 5 minutes because it's so satisfying to really hear the air
Yeah.
moving in this room, right? This is great. Now, impulse response, it's a virtual cabinet. So, you know, we know that kind of the virtual thing can never ever be as good as the real thing.
What?
However,
Well, what?
there are multiple reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
There's one point in the live situation. My PA signal going direct to the PA system is the better solution than a microphone. Why? Why? Because I have no bleed from any other microphone. I have the perfect mic position and anything, you know, in that direct signal, and that gives me the confidence that when I plug in the XLR into here or into my AMP prototype, which I'm currently using, that I know exactly what the sound guy is getting. It's not he's using this microphone or another microphone and you don't know what the guy is doing and where he puts the microphone. So therefore, in the live situation, I prefer going direct for ages already. And also the mic'd up FatCab versus this Stack 1970 is very, very similar because I try to simulate, honestly, that vintage cabinet. You know, I go all the way and those speakers have been tortured with bass and this is just so smooth, just perfect for me. That's even the better signal for the audience and the PA guy. And I'm having a real good feeling cabinet knowing that I did not bring the original cabinet. But when I play with my cabinet, I have the feeling and the audience gets even the slightly more defined vintage sound that I want. So I would say I use both of I use best of both worlds in the situation. And another thing that I noticed a lot is since I play with a real cabinet on stage, at stage volume, always on the edge of getting into the fight with the sound guy, but I keep up with the volume of the drums. So even if the sound guy makes a bad job, which happens occasionally because you play venues and don't have your own guy, or the guy is having a pee or drinks a beer or is important and talks to somebody, and there is still the guitar in the room because it's yeah, and so my sound for my music works actually best when the band, the real acoustic drums and the guitar is on the same level, having this natural, you know, classic rock headroom, dynamic and anything, and then the PA guy can do his game on top of that, and that works very good, and it's also safe. I have been to concerts where people played only direct, no matter what they were using. I'm not talking, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. But if this, you are relying then 100% on the sound guy, in that case, if the sound guy thinks drums are more important than guitar, the guitar player is gone. You see somebody
Yeah.
pulling faces and having fun with the in-ears, and he lives in
Pointing towards a stadium is going to sound any good, right? There's, you know, some cab is behind the stage being mic'd up, or they maybe have, you know, like a silent cab somewhere. Whatever they do, this is the sound you hear. You're not going to hear 100 cabinets pointing towards a football stadium.
no,
No way. It's not going to sound good. It's look cool. It's going to look cool, but it doesn't sound
yeah,
good. So in the end, this is you know, a device which has developed to sound good in a certain scenario, but it's not a PA system which is supposed to be used in the real world, right? Still, it is just a speaker cabinet.
yeah.
Now, capturing this vibe in the studio with everything being in a good room, perfectly mic'd and all of that, and putting it into something like this, right, is something that that will bring you to your sound goals, tone goals, way easier. And trust me, when you're playing live, every touring guitar player knows that. If you're not a huge act with 20 attacks running around the stage, you'll be thankful for having something like this. Um, and one guitar player I want to mention is is John Petrucci from Dream Theater, one of my favorite guitar players, right? If not my favorite guitar player. He's competing with Guthrie Govan, but yeah, he's on top of the list. Now, what they do live, for example, is he's using Mesa Boogie amps, right? And what they do live is so smart, but it's such an expensive setup. Is they have something on stage, and there's also some stage volume from a guitar and whatever, but he's using in-ear, right? They have the cabinet in like a room construction booth somewhere behind the stage. But this means that he has a team of techs who are building a recording booth every day, miking everything up there. Obviously it's going to sound huge. He's the only guitar player in the band. There are not two guitar players like many other metal bands. It sounds awesome live, right? But there's no way that other bands could kind of redo this with lower budgets. Like the size that just the size of the booth and everything, it's as big as some of the venues that we play sometimes. If it's like a Keller kind of thing, right? So practically, this is what I tell everyone. The reason why I love working with impulse responses, and I work with them 90% of the time for professional use, not for just noodling around, but for professional use, is the comfort. It makes things so much easier. You can change it if you don't like it. You can just change it in post, and especially live. Yeah, you'll have an easy time just plugging in, and that's it. That's my take. It's good. Here. You do best of both worlds. You hear your own sound on stage, the real deal, the cabinet, and the audience mostly hears your impulse response and a little bit of overlap from the stage. That's great.
Yeah. And the thing that I see is you are always dependent on other people when you use the in-ears, which is okay if you control them. But I have played in-ears and I had suffered a lot too. So for me, it's always good to have an option. And actually, I also love to have an option going direct, I was killing a cabinet in the past. Once one of my prototype
only one?
No, actually several times, because before BluGuitar existed, I already had my FatCab as my homemade solution that I preferred versus the using Kettner cabinets, which I had a little influence, but not all the way influence. And, it's like when they were finished and out on the market, I came up with some other idea. Let's try this. And they said, no, we have this product. Don't do any more. And I said, no, I want to check this out, which is now the FatCab. And those days, I was the biggest fan of the Celestion Greenback speaker, which handles 25 watts only. And I always played 100-watt amps. And I was killing a lot of these greenbacks. So in that moment, you are so happy if you have a direct out from your amp or, something like that, and you survive. And I know how I have to suffer when the guitar comes from the stage monitor and not from a proper guitar cabinet. And that's my criticism on these FR cabinets, which is similar to a stage monitor, because they are also full range flat response, and it feels sometimes it sounds okay, but you are so dependent on the guy and the gear that's being used, and sometimes you are suffering because there's no chuck, there is no tone, and it's
I totally get what you mean.
In that respect, and this is why I still believe in classic cabinets, and we have this NanoCap Neo Pro, which is 100 watts and small. It's the smallest 12-inch there is, and with such a thing you can survive better than with your monitor on stage.
Mine. Well, it's not the new version, but mine is here.
Cool.
See, so
Yeah.
there we go. Great. So Thomas, besides our personal takes on this, right? I'm gonna deep dive into all of this with a little more focus on modern tones and high gain in a second.
Sure.
But I want to ask you one more question before we do that. You know, I'm mostly a high gain guitar player. I do for like session jobs and pop music, rap music, things I do sometimes. I play with clean tones as well. But it's a very analytical thing. So they sent me a sample, I analyze it, I kind of try and redo it. It's a very studio musician-like thing. If I'm not playing into a guitar amp and I get a clean tone, naturally it's kind of hard for me to find something, right? To find the right licks without having an example or whatever. You are someone who's equally playing crunch tones, low gain tones, high gain tones, clean tones, right? So from your perspective, I'll explain people about my take on high gain with cabs and impulse responses in a second. But for clean tones, right? Is there something like a real like difference in how it feels playing through an impulse response and how it feels playing through a cabinet? Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
It is the same thing like with overdrive tones. I can feel the body when I'm close to a clean amp and the air moving. That always happens. And this is something that in German I would say, das trägt dich. So this is kind of that's a foundation. Yeah, it drives you. It's a foundation that you can ride. You know, it's like if the sound is good, and that's the same with clean and crunch and overdrive. The thing about studio situation and clean tones is different. In the studio situation, I have done a lot of session work where I was looking for sounds that are sounding different from a traditional guitar sound, in the way that there are traditional guitars in the arrangement. Let's say there's a crunchy Vox AC30, semi-overdriven, in between clean and overdrive guitar, and maybe there's a few whatever notes coming from that British Marshallesque sound for some rhythm guitars and whatnot. And then you want a sound that is completely separated from the whole thing to make like pad functions, like almost like a synthesizer, or studio tones like we know from Michael Jackson when Steve Lukather or those LA studio cats were playing. And they have used a lot of direct into the board. Also David Gilmour by Pink Floyd, some of his trademark clean tones are no amps. They go, yeah. So what you need is a specific preamp instead of an amp that has a very high input impedance. Some studio gear has that, and then they use just the mixing console and the compression. David Gilmour especially, he used 2 compressors in series. But if you take away the complexity of the guitar speaker color and have just EQ and guitar and the guitar pickups alive due to the high input, high Z input or high input impedance input, you get sounds that are different from the classic clean sounds. Donna Summer, I don't know the song. What's the name of this?
Oh, you're asking the wrong person here.
And there's a Jeff Skunk Baxter was a guitar player in the early days, and you can hear it is in your face in the studio, and it is something outstandingly exciting. Not being a guitar speaker, but then when you have these classic John Mayer, that needs to have a guitar speaker color. And
It's very interesting because like when I'm playing with clean tones, as I said, it doesn't happen too often, but occasionally it happens. I love doing metal, but also my daughter needs food, so sometimes Daddy needs to make some music that also sells. So when I do it, for example, if I'm just having funky kind of things like
yeah,
palm muted, single notes kind of stuff, right? I'm super happy with just having impulse responses to work with because there's going to be a compressor on it, so it sounds super unnatural anyway. At least the way I set it up, like the Cory Wong
yeah,
kind of feeling, right? And then I was working with a guy, and he was like more into like Afro pop, it's called. So it's like dominant seventh chords with some pull-offs and things thrown in, played a little bit like
yeah,
sloppy, but on
yeah,
purpose
yeah,
sloppy to right, and a little bit, yeah, so a little bit off, and so I had to do something like this. It was very interesting. Yeah, exactly. So it was very interesting to get into this, and I didn't, I wasn't happy with impulse response at all, like not at all. That was the first time I really needed to have something, because I felt like with the amp, like you feel the headroom a little bit more, when it's like more loose playing, not this kind of tight playing, but just very loose. There was something about the amp, especially in the kind of the bass frequencies or the low mid frequencies, kind of that kind of unfold itself to be more pleasing for like
these kinds of
uh
lines.
for
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
sustained
And I
notes.
think that's, clean is not clean. There is a whole universe of clean tones. I mean, just in the amplifier world, there's the Roland GC120 transistor clean sound with the magic chorus. This is the invention of chorus, basically. And that's a totally different, but high class clean tone versus a Fender, let's say, twin reverb. Lots of headroom, 100 watts, designed to be clean and never break up sound. And the structure of the tone in the clean world is a good source of inspiration. And it is, you can mimic something with a compressor, but in a guitar amp and in a guitar speaker, the things that are happening are way more complex, because in a guitar amp, every stage is being driven and compressing differently for different notes, because all the stages in the preamp section and tone section are saturated even, and they have an effect depending on the frequency. So one stage is kind of compressing more at a different frequencies range, which means different notes than another range, and this gives you sometimes a very balanced or unbalanced sound. Like if you try to play jazzy or stuff like that, you want to have a different feel. Like yeah, but it's I have been doing this kind of in the studio a little bit, but I'm not a jazz guy. But it is different from funky. Jazz and funky sometimes share the same chords, but in the jazz you have to have more open ringing notes quality and woodiness, and in a funk situation the woodiness can also be important, but it's more about the attack and and different ways of creating clean tones can give you that. So they are equally coexisting, and they are all equally important, but it's all what you need. Some people, they don't even have a clean channel. In my world, some of my heroes like Blackmore, they had a one channel amp, and they backed up the volume a little bit, and there was the clean tone, which was also great.
Yeah, true. Wow. Okay. This is very interesting to hear that, and also some of the things that I kind of feel that I don't know about, because I'm not a per se clean guitar player. But it seems that some of the feelings I had when I did use clean tones for professional reasons were kind of right. It's great to hear, Thomas. Thank you so much for participating in this. Your knowledge, experience is invaluable, and it's so great to hear of these things, and especially like having this, impulse response and counter at the same time. Such a great thing. I may copy that in the future. Now,
Yeah.
you said,
I have one.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, sorry,
I have
go on.
one. I have one thing that I would love to add on. I mean, we spoke about the studio situation and we spoke about the live situation. When you are in the studio, you are free to do whatever. You have, you have the time to experiment. And in this situation, I have been doing several things, and sometimes even several things at once. So I have the freedom to use whatever works best in the mix. I mean, this is what you're doing with recording the guitar direct and then reamping, or just using an unprocessed signal and do different IRs for the mixing session, or mixing different IRs. And you can do anything. You can mix IRs, you can mix IRs with microphones and anything. But, and that's the point that I wanted to make here, is watch the phase. So if you have a signal and you mix it with another signal, if they're out of phase, the sound gets wishy-washy. And and so maybe you don't have the time when you record it, but you still have still a microphone around, and you place it in front of the amp, and you think you sounds cool, but in the monitor situation, you have whatever your IR or whatever you feel great with at this moment. Maybe you still have an extra track with that mic, but then when it comes to the mix session and you want to blend both signals, then you have to zoom in the wave and you find exactly the same spot, and then you have to put them in line, make them aligned so they are in sync with the phase. That's super critical. And I can encourage everybody, for a studio situation, experiment. You will always learn. And maybe you learn what you don't like, but eventually you discover things you haven't thought before, and that's always a good source of inspiration. So, I have done crazy things, and the engineers I worked with in the past, I drove them nuts. It's like I put a mark on the cabinet here, there, and then we had 5. And which one is the best? Well,
all of them.
And all of them, yes. Anyway, so that's the comment here.
Yeah, well, great that you mentioned it. So I also had it sometimes in the past that I was recording 2 tracks, had different R's on there, and whoop, everything sounded like like bad
Yeah.
thing. So certainly, yeah. Like with modern plugins, it's kind of easier to control phase because you can just turn the phase on a click. But certainly that's something when you get into double tracking and things like that, we certainly need to pay attention to that. Yeah, especially when you're using the same DI track to reamp 2 different sources. That's very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So you said a clean tone is not a clean tone. Hey everyone, welcome at Academy of Shred. My name is Emanuel, and I have the pleasure and the honor to be your host of today's episode of Academy of Shred. Some of you may have recognized the riffs I just played in the beginning. Some super sad news. I'm extremely sad about this. There's nothing else to say. I mean, I could talk now for ages about the importance of Ozzy's music in my life. However, I think that, everyone who's watching has a certain story with Ozzy and his music. So I'm not going to get deep into this, but just let me say one thing. Without Ozzy, there wouldn't be anything of what I do in life. He was one of the inventors of heavy metal, amongst some other guys like Dio. I listened so much to his music. He had a very good taste in guitar players. Randy, Jakey Lee, Zakk Wylde, Gus G. He was always picking guitar players that are amongst my favorite players. Such a genius, such a someone with a creative vision. There was nothing like this kind of music before, and everything that he brought to the business, not only the music, the show, the style, everything, invaluable. Super sad. So when you're watching from anywhere in the world, doesn't matter from where you are, let's have 10 seconds of silence in honor to Ozzy Osbourne. All right. As I said, I'm sad inside, but Ozzy was about heavy metal, about living life, about live shows, touring, all of this. So I think we shouldn't spend tonight, being sad, exchanging memories about Ozzy and his music, but, celebrating life, playing some good music. That's what I plan to do, and I hope that you guys are with me. So today's topic is cabinet versus impulse response versus emulator. And yeah, let's start with the cabinet, right? So that is a BluGuitar TwinCab that we have right here on my back. If I change to my second camera, you may be able to you see more of the BluBOX. But yeah, that is how it looks like. And this is currently mic'd up. That was what you were hearing in the beginning. And let me play a couple of notes for you, having this amplifier on. Feels so good. I mean, obviously, let's get straight into it. What you are hearing is a guitar cabinet that's been mic'd. I mic'd it up with an SM57 by Shure, which is kind of one of the, let's say, classic, really like the classic microphones to amp up a metal cabinet, a metal tone, a cabinet for metal tone. And yeah, the reason why I picked that is it's a dynamic microphone, so it can handle volume, compression, all of that. It does have a certain quite aggressive characteristic to it, right? And this is something that we certainly like to have in metal. So there are microphones that do sound a little smoother, but this is not what we want if we want to play metal guitar. We want to have some bite. Smoothness is also good, also metal, but we want to have a certain degree of bite, and this is something that whenever you mic something up with an SM57, right, it represents higher frequency spectrums in a way that only few microphones do. It's not even an expensive mic, it's around $100, but it's so good. So let's take a look at the amp settings very quick. So this is how I set my amp up right now. Let me improve that angle just a little bit. This is how I did set up my amp right now. So it is in modern mode, right? Settings is 6 on the bass, we got around 4 in the middle, and 4.5 for treble, and then we got quite a lot of gain, so it's gain on max. I can back up the gain a little bit, so let's go for 8. Boost is on, always with me, boost is always boost is always on. And yeah, let's play a couple of more riffs for the setting. There we go, right? This is how a proper guitar tone sounds. We can play a little bit with the settings again. So, sorry guys, the setup of my second cam is not ideal tonight, but we'll get this sorted. So let's get this a little more behind, right? So actually, yeah, has some of this nice amplifier in there, and also you can see later on, you can see the settings of the BluBOX right there. So what we could do now, right, and this is the classic stuff that I tend to explain, let's get into it, right? We could reduce the mids a little more even, right? And now let's go back to 3 with the mids and see how that sounds. Right, so that will give you kind of the mid scoop that many of us want to have in modern metal, really. Something that I go for most of the times when I'm trying to play modern metal music. It's quite extreme. It's changing quite extreme. So when the mid is on 4, right, it does sound a little more like a little juicier, which depending on your liking, right, can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. However, when we turn down the mids again, back to 3. It becomes extremely tight, and this is something that is, you know, certainly very, very good in a lot of situations, for handling down-tuned guitars, for handling very high gain tones, right? If their, you know, guitar is quad-tracked or you know, things like that. So the guitar, especially in busy mixes, it doesn't get in your way with this kind of tone. So this is the classic modern guitar metal tone, right? Scoop mids, lots of gain. There you go. Now, this is something that you may not enjoy all the time. So let's go to another channel. In this case, let's try the classic channel. Go back to a more neutral setting, so we have some mids in, and get rid of of the bass a little bit. Right, so there we go. This sounds a little bitier, I'd say. So we got more juiciness in there due to the mids, right? I got them back in, but anyway, the classic channel does sound a little more like that naturally. And generally, it's a less dark tone. It's a brighter tone. It's not exactly a very, very bright tone. Don't get me wrong here, but it's a brighter tone, so that can certainly make sense. You know, if you don't want to have this mid scoop more modern tone, but if you want to have something that is, let's say, a little more traditional, like Ali. Right, this kind of thing. Okay, great. Now I'm playing all of this. AMP1 going straight into the cab, and that's it. There's nothing else in between, right? I mic'd up with the SM57. Someone was mentioning the SM7B. I got this one here. This is the one that captures my talk, and really like this one. However, not for like metal guitar tones, right? So this is something I'd use for more, you know, basically for less heavy music. Just makes sense. One of my favorite mics, if not my favorite mic for vocals, works for guitar in some situations. Yeah. Now. Let's go a little bit for lead tones. So what we'll do is we'll activate the reverb, and then we'll play a little bit with the settings. So let's see how this feels in general. Right, so it's not exactly a bad tone for lead guitar as well, right? So kind of the same tone does work in two different situations. Now, what could we do to kind of get it more lead guitarish, right? So gain's quite high up, boost is always on with me. Most of the times it's on. So this works kind of good. We could, for instance, add just a little more gain to get a little more sustain, but that's not what it is about. So first of all, when I play lead guitar, right, I do have a little more of the mids in here. Instantly we get something that is more enjoyable for leads. Depending on how you like it, you could add you could get rid of a little more of the bass. However, right now it really sounds good to me. Treble, there's a thing, right? So personally I tend to go more towards darker guitar tones. This is just what I personally enjoy. But we can try out to get a little more of the highs in there. So let's boost the treble a little bit. Does make sense. Sounds really good. Just, I just prefer it with a little less treble. So let's go for that again. Naturally navigating more towards these kind of tones. All right. Let's take a little look at the chat before we go on. So there are a couple of comments. If you have any questions, I had the one about the SM7B already, right? Great microphone, good for guitar. I prefer the SM57 because it's a dynamic microphone. It handles compression just a little bit different, right? That's not say better, but a little bit different. Could be perfectly fine to be used as a main microphone. Sometimes I use it as a second microphone, but SM57 is just the way that I like to do it. Maybe you know about Fredman, the producer, right? Studio Fredman from Sweden kind of did this Swedish metal tone. He always uses SM57s in a stereo setup, so this is kind of what I naturally do prefer. If it was about clean tones, crunch tones, story may be different. I may prefer this one. So it depends on the case, right? Good. Side control position. Someone asked us about that. So not very visible right now, I know, but let me read it out to you. The boost is on midway, right? And then for the tone, it's always midway. Yeah, so slightly, maybe slightly off, but it's mostly in the mid. There are some great things you can do with the custom control knobs, custom tone knobs, but like personally, I think that these knobs are so powerful, and most of the times they just make me very, very happy. As I was just demonstrating back on the modern channel, right? We had something like this, 6 on the bass, we had mids on 4, and then between 4 and 5 by treble. So it sounds like this. Go to the close out. It sounds like this. If I just slightly tweak the mid knob, by slightly I mean just slightly, from 4 to 3, it sounds completely different. And as we're having such a powerful equalizer on the main knobs, right? As the equalizer is so powerful on the AMP1, right? Generally, I don't really use the tone knob if I don't have to. So, how to put that right? If the tone knob is in the middle, right? These knobs, they mostly give me everything I need to get a sound that I'm happy with. However, if you like to shape the general style of the tone, that one can be quite interesting. We can just play around with this a little bit. So we're on the modern channel. Let's put the tone knob a little, put it down. So right? So you can see it gets a little more boxy, it gets a little more aggressive if you want, right? Great tool to shape the general style of the amp. For me, it's mostly in the mid, and this is where it goes back right now. Where are you? Kind of hard to see in the dark. All right, cool. That was how it sounded with the TwinCab being mic'd with the SM57. Mentioning the TwinCab and the AMP1 Iridium, right? We're gonna talk about a special topic in just a few moments, because we had the test weeks and there were a couple of guys who were, you know, getting AMP1 Iridium and the TwinCab to try it out at home, to give it a test, to give it a test drive. And guys, if you are here, feel free, you know, to leave a comment to tell us about your experience. They did ask a couple of questions, which we'll get into later. There's a lot on the table today that we have to work on. All right, now that is how the amp sounds with a guitar player and nothing else. But something that, you know, I really like to talk about also in the last streams, and you'll get used to it, right? Because I also do it in the future streams, is how does it sound in a mix, right? So in the beginning, you've seen a song where I had one of my favorite impulse responses, where I had the cab mic'd up, and where I also had the BluBOX, right, which you'll see here in the background, right, left to my AMP1, and I had them all in the same song. But what I did for you guys is I produced the same video, but just having one cabinet or impulse response at the time, the full song. So let's take a look at the song with just having the cabinet, not the others, not the impulse response, not the BluBOX, right? Just the cabinet in a fully mixed and produced metal song. Here we go. we are back in my studio, and yeah, that was the song just with the cabinet and the exact same setup that we just had, right? That is how it sounds. Now, cabinet, great thing to use, and in the interview in the beginning I did with Thomas, we kind of talked very detailed about advantages, disadvantages, and all of that. And this brings me to the next topic for today, which is using impulse responses. So I prepared two types of impulse responses, or two types of using impulse responses for you guys today. One is, having my computer here set up with a software that allows me to use impulse responses, to basically use any kind of impulse response that I can find. So let me show you how that looks like. This is my computer right now, and I do have 3 different tracks. One is a custom impulse response that I have here. I'll show you what that is in a second. The other one was just the cabinet. As you can see, no plugin. That's what we just heard. And then we have the BluBOX, also with no plugin. So right now, I'm on my custom impulse response. And I want to show you how that sounds. So AMP, let's take a look at that one again. We're back on the modern channel, right? And we are in the scooped mid setting that I like so much. So this is how it sounds with my impulse response. Right, so this is kind of one of my favorite impulse responses. I promised you to show you what it is, so we do that right now. This is Cabinetron. This is a piece of software that is just used to load impulse responses. And what I have here is a diesel cabinet, 4x12 diesel cabinet with V30 speakers, and it's called modern, so it's EQ'd to be a little more modern sounding. Right, so as you can see, quite dark tones, as I like it, not too much going on in the mids, a little scoop on the low mids, right? So this is something that I naturally navigate towards. Let's go to the classic channel and see how it sounds here with the exact same setting. Right, so yeah, that is something that I really like to work with in a lot of cases. Let's do some slight tweaking on the tone knob. As you can hear, it gets a little more aggressive if I put in more highs on the tone knob. Let's make it a little smoother by going back and then. Right, great stuff for rhythm guitar. The thing now that I want to point out here is the flexibility that you have when you're doing such a thing. So we are using a piece of software. If I turn it off, then it sounds like this. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong button. It sounds like this. Right, so not enjoyable at all. Once we turn it on, right, this is the replacement for our cabinet. Now, one of the reasons why impulse responses got so popular over the last couple of years is that it gives you quite some flexibility in your working process, right? In your workflow. So let's say that I did record something and for some reason it doesn't work in the mix the way I want it to, right? I got my cabinet set up, I got my mic set up, everything sounds great in the room and the recording, and then I have something like, I just showed you a very, very busy arrangement with pounding drums and orchestra and choirs and effects and all of that. So maybe that your tone doesn't really work for this kind of scenario. What you could do then, if you're using impulse responses, is just change it to, well, we just had the diesel, now let's go, for example, for a mezza boogie. So let's take this one. See how that sounds. Let's go for some drop tuning. Right? Sounds way different. Let's go back to the first one. Right? Let's get more extreme. Still, both of them are based on a V30 kind of setup. What else do we have here? So let's go for a Marshall, but not one with V30. So all of them have V30. G80 plus V30. We don't get rid of the V30s here. Back to only the Mesa with the V30s. Back to the diesel. Right? So if I felt like I could change it at any time, and this is something that is extremely helpful when you are, when you're not 100% sure about how you want things to sound. It's similar to, what the flexibility that you have when you're recording with the eyes. I mean, obviously the amp does have a huge impact on the sound, but if you like the amp, if you want to work with a certain amp like the AMP1, right, and then want to have a little, let's say, like rest off flexibility, if that makes sense, right, a little headroom to tweak things, then this is a great way to go. All right, I said that we had the test weeks going on just a little time back, so let me explain about that a little bit. So test weeks at BluGuitar means that we have a certain range of product, and that in this case we had the AMP1 Iridium and the TwinCab that you can order for free to your place, right? So free of charge, no cargo, it will come to your place. You don't have to pay anything up front. You can test the devices for a certain period of time, and we'll make sure that it's enough time, right, to understand if you like it or not. And if you're happy with it, you keep it. If you're not happy with it, you can send it back, right? That's it. So it's 100% safe. Something that is just very comfortable to be able to really dig in to tones, right? To maybe combine it with your favorite guitars, favorite pedals. Going to a store, playing it there is a great opportunity as well, or listening to online demos. But if you have it at your place, right, this is a whole different story, right? Because you have all the time in the world and have all your gear there, everything, right? Just makes sense. So we had this event going on, and right now, we had a couple of people this weekend who we were writing back and forth with, asking them about their experience, if they had any questions. And yeah, we want to get into this right now. So one question which I have received, and this is where we're going back to impulse responses. One question that I have received was, what is the difference in getting a good tone live and getting a good tone at home? This is a perfect question for what we are doing today. So let's get a little bit into this again. We had this with Thomas in the beginning, but just to answer this question. So when you're at home, you have all the time in the world, right, to dial into a great tone. No one's disturbing you, right? And this is just a very comfortable situation. I think that playing with a cabinet in a good room, having a lot of time to dial the tone in, is extremely joyful and is something that is irreplaceable. It's such a great experience, right? I think every guitar player had this. Just sitting there and just chunking, right? When you have a cabinet next to, feeling the air moving, that is something that is extremely joyful. Now, imagine you be on stage. That's a whole different story, right? Because mostly playing gigs, I mean, everyone has different experiences, but doing this partially for a living for the best part of 10 years now, I never ever had a gig where everything went smooth, where I had a lot of time and I was playing with majesty and a quite big act, so we did have tags and all of that, right? Even in these situations, there are a couple of factors that you cannot, that you don't have any control of. For example, the venue, right? Every venue sounds different. There are small stages, there are big stages. Open air sounds different to indoor, right? So a lot of factors that really, you can't do anything about it. And if you're using your cabinet and your microphone, it will sound different every day. So it's very hard to get a constant tone in there unless you have something like a silent cabinet, or unless you have, playing in a very big band, have a lot of money to pay people and gear, and they set up something like a recording booth behind the stage, like John Petrucci does. If that's not the case, right, playing with a cabinet live may not be the easiest opportunity. There are certainly, artists and gigs where playing live with a cabinet sounds incredibly awesome. Not saying it's not possible. It is possible. And in fact, it is possible, right? Some of the greatest live tones have been recorded with cabinets. But think about the scenario. Imagine, like, you see a band like Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Black Sabbath, right? Some of these guys. In this case, right, there are dozens of people who work for them to make sure that everything is running good. And this way, right, obviously it's easier to get a good tone with a cabinet. Now, in normal people's life, let's put it like that, right? Quite hard to do that. And therefore, I think impulse responses are extremely handy. Not only in the studio, having some flexibility when you want to change tones afterwards, as I just mentioned, but also when you're playing live. Obviously, you don't want to get your computer with you when you're playing live, right? That's something super uncomfortable, having a computer interface or anything with you. And there comes this into play. So what we see here is the BluBOX right behind the AMP1, and we'll play with that in just a second, because that is technically a device that enables you to bring impulse responses to any gig that that you're going to. But before we do that, let's take a look at the same song that we just heard in the beginning, but this time mixed and mastered, fully produced with the impulse response, the diesel I just played through a minute ago. Here we go, and afterwards we'll hear how the BluBOX sounds. Alright, guys, I'm back here live. What you just heard was me playing my AMP1 Iridium through the BluBOX. So that is the little box that you can see right behind the AMP1 Iridium. You know, I know it's an ideal camera setting. Get it a little more in front, but due to technical reasons, I have to make this it this way today. Now, what is the BluBOX? The BluBOX is actually a device that is something that can kind of that has inbuilt impulse responses. So the thing I was just talking about. And then we had the question about someone who did participate in the test weeks that we had, was asking for getting a good sound live as well. Now, there you go, right? An impulse response will sound the exact same way everywhere you go, and that is the big advantage over having an amplifier, right? So it means that if you plug it in when you're playing in the stadium, when you're playing, you know, just in the garden of a neighbor, it doesn't matter, it will sound the same at any given time, right? There's no factors like the style of the venue, you know, the miking position, the other instruments that are on stage, like having drum bleeding into the microphone, everything. You don't have to think about that. It's just the impulse response. So that will be my answer to this question. All right, I just dropped the BluBOX, so I need to get it back very quick. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong one. So let's take a look at me getting the BluBOX back where it belongs. On the TwinCab. Just a second, guys. All right. Here we go. That it's back at its place, and this is how it sounds. Right, that is the BluBOX. One of the questions in the chat is what cab are you using on the BluBOX? Right now I'm using the Metal V30. So let's get into riffing a little bit. Let's higher the volume. Right, so this is the Metal V30. You know, not, as I said, not ideal. Metal V30, and the mic positioning is kind of midway, slightly pointing towards edge. That's the next thing about BluBOX, right? You can emulate different mic positions, which gives you even more flexibility over the sound. Should have mentioned that in the beginning. So that is something I really like to use. However, in the video that you've seen in the beginning, the part where I was using BluBOX, I was using another impulse response, which was the Metal G80. So that's how it sounds. So when we compare them head to head, that's the V30. And now we're going to the G80. So I feel that the V30 is a little more aggressive. That is, I mean, what a V30 speaker is meant to do, right? And as you've seen, I'm kind of a sucker for V30 speakers. Really, most of my personal impulse responses do have V30 kind of a cabinet. However, I wanted to have something different, right? That's why I used it in the video. The G80 is kind of a little smoother, a little less harsh. So just something to show off a little different side of that. However, I'm on the modern channel now. Let's go to the classic channel, because I think that the G80 is also extremely good with the classic channel. So this is how that sounds. So I think it's quite a good fit, especially for lead guitar tones. I like it. It can do metal as can do rhythm as well. So again, my trick, turn down the mids. That's how it sounds for rhythm guitar. No issue at all, right? Back to the modern channel. Right? G80 is kind of, something, I mean, it's not as iconic as the V30 for metal, I'd say, but if you want to get smoother tones, that's the way to go. Another impulse response on this device, while I was testing it, that I really liked was the stack 71 and 67 I really liked. So that's how the 71 sounds. Turn up the volume a little bit. Right? So it sounds a little more boxy, but I really like this kind of tone. It gives me kind of a little bit like Alice in Chains kind of vibes. Right, really kind of like this tone for certain cases. All right, we do have a question in the chat, which is, can we switch to the Stack 65? Of course we can. Let me find it. Then we got the 65, and this is how that sounds. Modern channel. Let's put in some bits back. So here we go. Riffing. There we go. All right. Cool. Let's take another look at the comment section. So Stacks, we had that. I want the TwinCab sound on my BluBOX, but there's no option which box. I have to choose something with TwinCab. All right, we have a user here who does want to have a TwinCab sound on the BluBOX. Now, kind of hard to get, because we're getting back to the story we had in the beginning, which was you have a cab, it's placed in a certain room, it's mic'd up with a certain mic and a certain angle, right? so there we go. There are a lot of factors, relative factors, that we need to take into account when we're talking about, you know, how to emulate a certain sound with an impulse response. But we don't have the TwinCab on the BluBOX, but what we have is the FatCab. It's not, obviously it's a different device, it sounds different, but there are some parallels. One of which is that the same mastermind built two of the cabinets, right? Thomas does use a FatCab occasionally as well. So there may be some of the DNA in there that you want to have. Not the same device at all, but you know, the same mastermind behind that. So maybe you can get pleased with that. If you want to have the exact same sound like the TwinCab, unfortunately, you know, there's nothing we can do for you right now. Maybe, I don't know, if at some point there will be another updated BluBOX, right, with the TwinCab. But for right now, the only thing we can offer you is the FatCab, which sounds like this. Sounds fat indeed. Let's go to the classic channel. Wow, the FatCab is hot. Let's get the volume dialed back a little bit. Was a little bit of my inner slash today. Right, that's what we have on the BluBOX. Great. So killer sound for classic metal. I agree. A lot of good stuff on this device. Thomas just added that the TwinCab wasn't out when the BluBOX came, so there we go. That's the reason for it. All right. I'd say that we'll take a look at another question of someone who was testing the AMP1 Iridium during the test weeks. But before we do so, we'll do what we did for the others as well, which is taking a look at how the song that I produced for today's stream sounds only using the BluBOX. Here we go. Alright, here I am back. So that was pure BluBOX action, pure BluGuitar action, right? We had the BluBOX, we had the AMP1, everything by BluGuitar. So I don't have a guitar in my hands, which is something that barely happens when I'm in this room. The reason why that is because we do a funny thing now, which is, boom, going back to my desktop. Right, and here we are in my DAW. So it's a software that I use called Logic Pro X, where I do anything about, you know, audio mostly. And it does look quite complex and quite overwhelming. I mean, this is how much effort goes into making these videos. Right? Could tell you crazy stories about what happened today, but let's keep it short. My SD card was broken, and then my hard drive was broken, and then I needed to re-record stuff. So I'm coming from a very stressful day. But oops, again, got the wrong window here. But nevertheless, we're not here to talk about my day, but to talk about sounds and tones. So we have this setup right here. My DAW session where I have all the different guitar tracks that I was actually using in this song. And the reason why I brought this up is to show you, right, how these tones sound head to head, how they sound raw and how they sound processed. So as you can see, I have left and right rhythm guitar tracks here captured, right? So that's what is kind of industry standard for metal, right? Double tracking, some even do quad tracking. I also do it sometimes, but mostly I'm happy with double tracking, especially for this opportunity here, because for this occasion here, because right, it was less of like the Rammstein sound, but this was like very precision based music. Left and right, and I did this for the cabinet, for the impulse response, and then for the emulator, which is the BluBOX, right? This is all drums. This is bass, MIDI bass. I don't want to talk about that. I have the same thing for solo. So I have the solo cabinet with the cabinet here. I have the solo with the impulse response, and then with the BluBOX here. And then I have a riff at some point at the end, right? Which I also did with the cabinet, with the impulse response, and with the BluBOX. Now, let's start with the cabinet. I'm gonna solo this, and then I turn off all of the plugins that you can see here, right? So this is what happens on my computer to these tones. Let's put them all off and see how that sounds. Let's have it head to head with the impulse response tone. So same thing, turn everything off, and then we'll hear how it sounds. So naturally that was recorded a little bit louder, so it may make sense to turn on the compressor because some volume is added back by the compressor. Back to the cabinet. Impulse response. Let's go to the BluBOX. See how that sounds without the plugins. Back to impulse response, custom. Back to cabinet. Let's go to a different part of the song. So this one here is quite riff based. Again, cabinet. Let's go for impulse response. Let's go for the BluBOX. Let's Right. No post-processing, right? It's, well, the master bus is on, but that's equally on for all of the tones. Now let's hear how they sound if I do a little bit of mixing, right? So obviously I did this before, set everything up to my liking, and let's hear how that sounds. So this is the cabinet post-produced. This is the impulse response with post-production. This is the BluBOX with post-production. Right. So I'd say that, you know, again, I tried to make them sound quite different. So with the cab, I tried to go for a little more bass heavy tone, right? More towards like Swedish death metal kind of thing, because I felt it worked quite good with this SM57 kind of vibe. For the impulse response, I went for like modern, you know, modern 5150-ish kind of tone, right? And then for the BluBOX, right, I tried to make something in between. What are the different strengths and properties of these tones? Let's put it like this. So the cabinet, it does have quite, you know, let's put the direct, well, it does have some balls, some serious balls, right? So there are lower frequencies that are quite dominant here, which I was able to capture with the microphone. Had it on quite a high volume, right? Captured like that, and the microphone was slightly etched, so that did work quite well. You can argue now if it's too much bass for a rhythm guitar tone, but you know, it's all based on your personal liking. So some would like it, some don't really like it. That is something that I really much admire about this tone. It's quite a dark tone. Again, I like dark tones, and the reason for that is, you know, and you will hear that with a lot of impulse responses. When impulse responses are made, they are EQ'd afterwards mostly. And something that cabinets, real guitar cabinets, don't reproduce is, you know, frequency of above 5 or 6K. So that is something that if you hear that on a very high, you know, on a guitar tone with like very high frequencies, right, it's something that mostly comes from post-production. Now, therefore, you know, that's a quality that you can really capture with a cabinet. The bassy kind of low-end-ish, well, not exactly low-end, but the lower end of the guitar spectrum, right? That's something that comes across very authentically here in this tone. So let's hear it again. Right? You can hear that boom, 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 boom. I did EQ it a little bit out, so we can take a look at the EQs, things I did. This is just a couple of resonances. Now, right, this is how the EQ looks like. So some mid scoop, again here some, you know, like weird noises that I didn't like. Did put some of the low end out again because, you know, if that wasn't, it would be very bass heavy. To control it a little bit more. Have a second EQ here, get rid of some of the low mids, a little more mid scoop. Another thing I didn't like about that, and the highs. And then the last one is just, you know, the control of the palm mutes. There we go. That's what I like about this tone. Let's go with the impulse response next. Right. So obviously this tone, it does sound a lot more like a lot brighter, right? It sounds quite open, which is a modern thing, right? If we take a look at the equalizer here, right, we can see that the EQ looks kind of similar. I didn't delete as much bass as I did it with the first one because it naturally doesn't have so much bass in here. Therefore, it sounds a little thinner. but a little tighter, right? So this is kind of a trade-off you'll have to make at some points. You want to have a very thick wall of sound-ish kind of tone, or you want to have something that's super tight. For this tone, I went for the kind of tighter, more open sounding tone. That's the first EQ. Second EQ, again, there were a couple of more frequencies I didn't really like in the highs. Basically, it's getting rid of a lot of mids, as we're doing metal here. Yeah, so that it's not a fat tone, not really, right? So let me play it again. Super tight, very great to play these faster, riff kind of thing, but like some lower end of the guitar. Say it's the complete opposite with the cabinet, right? Right. It does have the balls to it, but it sounds less tight. Now, we could combine both of them. Let's see if that works. Doesn't work here right now because it's the same DI track that's playing into both amps, so we get some phase issues, right? So that's another story for another episode, but yeah, we got some phase issues if we play both of these tracks at the same time. Let's go to the BluBOX, see how that sounds, and let me explain what I like about this baritone. This is kind of in the middle, so it does have a little more low end than the impulse. The custom impulse response I was using, it's not as much low end as the cabinet. It sounds a little more open, a little brighter than what I did with the impulse response, but again, just not as much. But at the same time, way brighter than what the cabinet did, right? So it's kind of in the middle here, really. It depends on what kind of sound I would go for here, really, right? So it's in the end a matter of personal taste. I couldn't really pick a favorite here, right? Because it's kind of hard to explain, really. I did create all three of these tones and really kind of like them equally. If I had to pick one, wouldn't really know which one to go. All of them have different strengths. If it would be a proper production, that was what I was about to say, right? Just my hat went elsewhere. If it now was a thing I do for a customer, right? I try to blend these tones, right? So perhaps I would try to blend the TwinCab with the impulse response, and then maybe the TwinCab with the BluBOX as well. Right, see how that sounds. Again, we can't do that right now because I need to fix the phases, and that'll take a little time here on the computer. So in that case, I would just do quad recording, and we wouldn't have any phase issues likely. Yeah. So a question that we had, and by the way, guys, if you have any questions about this, post them in the chat and try my best to answer them. Which of these tones did sit best in the mix? Judge it yourself. I'll play them fully mixed right now for you. By the way, guys, let's make a little voting out of that, all right? So I'm posting, I'm replaying, this first part here again, this main riff, and everyone, then tells his or her favorite tone, all right? So this is the cabinet. This is the impulse response in the mix. And this is the BluBOX in the mix. Let me know what your favorite is if you want, right? again, I couldn't pick one. They all have different qualities. It's like, I'm not, mostly in life, in most situations, I'm not the kind of person that is, you know, being like, this is better, this is worse, or whatever. Depends on what I like, right? So if it's about sitting in the mix, right, I'd say that the custom impulse response does quite a good job because it's not getting in the way of other stuff, right? The cabinet sits in the mix quite good, but it does push from the low end. Something you may like, something you may not like, right? But it's quite well in there. However, you can really feel something down there, which is so perhaps something you may like. When I have something that doesn't get in the way of the other stuff, right? The custom impulse response is maybe the way to go. All right. So we get it all done, I guess, right? We did play some music. We did honor Ozzy Osbourne today, the Prince of Darkness. We compared cabinet, impulse response, and BluBOX head-to-head. Technically, BluBOX and impulse response, same thing. But the BluBOX is a device that you can take with you when you're playing a gig without having, to worry about software and anything. You just plug your guitar amplifier in that, go straight to the PA or whatever in here, and then right, everyone will hear you. So we also had that covered, and then we had the custom impulse response. We did take a look at all this, like at the same song, but with all the different options I had on there, right? Saw how that sounds, and we now took a look at the DAW session to see how things sound processed, unprocessed, and compare them head by head. So I think that we did get a lot of stuff done today. What I'd do now is I'd switch back to my guitar and do a little last bit of shredding. So maybe if you guys have any kind of question in your head, right? This is the last chance to dance. So while my program is opening up here, switching back to my main cam, I'm grabbing my guitar again, seeing if it works. It does work, right? We'll stay on the BluBOX, and then I'm on the Metal G80, which is the one I use for the song. Really love this smooth, quite a smooth metal tone, which I really like. Oh, I gotta set up my DAW because it was now set up for the session that we just had. Can show you around basically when I'm doing it, right? So that's the wrong one. Here we go, right? So quite some latency. There are a couple of things that need to be different when you're playing, which are now set up. That feels a lot better, a lot less latency. All right, here we go. The thing I did in the song, kind of very hard thing. I don't remember everything note for note right now. Super complicated. It's like that, right? So some crazy shit I composed there. It's now obviously a different story to play it without click live, but really like to do these things, and that's what it's all about. It's just the thing I did right like over the past couple of days, right, was just basically using these devices to get inspired, and that's a good topic to end this whole thing off today. everything does have advantages and disadvantages, which I and Thomas, we did talk in the stream quite detailed about this, like playing live and you know, having time or not having time, being stressed or whatever, right? But in the end, you know, you should use something that inspires you to do music. That is what it's all about, right? Did use my impulse response to the cabinet and the BluBOX in the process. And for instance, I did write the riffs when I was plugged into the cab, because I said, you know, I really like this chugging kind of thing. And things like that. They're super fun when you're having an amplifier and can do this when you're plugged into a cabinet, right? Now the lead guitar ports, I remember to have written while I was using the BluBOX, right? Because I was able to instantly get some, you know, at the same time, controlled, tight, little harsh, but in a good way, still at the same time creamy tones with a G80 speaker, right? So this was something, the setup I'm on right now, basically. Such a joyful lead guitar tone, man. I could play this for days. So I did use the BluBOX, right, to write the lead guitar ports, which I had, and basically, like, the beginning is, you know, full on shred stuff, but later on you'll realize that if you know some of the other music that I do, right, I did play quite some melodic Marty Friedman kind of phrasing things there, because just this feel to have this exact setup on the BluBOX, right, and then holding notes. It doesn't work for all. It does work for that perfectly fine, but you know, just having this. This, you know, just vibing with this, playing wrong notes, putting them back into place, just feels great on this tone. So, you know, it depends really on what you're doing. If you're playing live, I go for a compromise, right? That gives you a tone that is safe, that you're happy with, right? That may not give you the same excitement as a cabinet, but it's just something to work with live. You'll be, you know, you'll feel good, right? That's really the thing. When you're, you know, playing at home or working in the studio, whatever, right? You have the time, the resources, right? The microphones and everything to dial in a tone with a cabinet. Man, there's nothing that speaks against it. It's a great thing when you're playing live, and you know that you're playing, you know, similar venues all the time. Like, you know, if you're working in the theater or whatever, right? And you know everything is set up the same every day. Maybe you can work with a cabinet live as well, right? Or maybe you just go nuts and just buy the one that you like most and do all of it with it, studio, live, whatever, right? It always depends on what you're going for. But these were my thoughts. So let's take a last look at the chat. This is funny. Solo, I like the impulse response best in the mix, the cabinet or the BluBOX. Yeah, and that's really a thing. I could talk about that for ages, right? Sometimes it is like, and this is something, you know, I had to learn the hard way. I'm still learning it, and everyone should learn it, I think. When you're getting into music production, right? Tones work different than when you're just sitting there and playing and chugging, you know, having fun. It's like when I'm sitting here playing, I set myself up in a way that I sound quite epic, you know, with effects and delays and stuff like that. So something that just gets me comfy with playing. It doesn't work in the mix. Hell, it doesn't, right? So that's a whole different story all the time. All right. I would choose your custom IR. It's crisp, cuts through the mix very well, but also I like the BluBOX sound. It was a little smoother, right? So again, right, very valuable comments we have here. So everyone is appreciating the advantages, or it's not to say the advantages, but the different properties of every tone that we have. It's quite impossible to say which one is the best, but they're all different, and they are different on purpose. Great, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you did enjoy today's video. I'm super happy that everything then came together after having a very stressful day, having to make out with a lot of work for the loss of my hard drive, but I did enjoy it a lot. Well, but just Hall, you're lucky, because I took another look at the chat, seeing that you asked something, a different question. Could you do an episode in only using the Mercury edition for metal, maybe also standard E-tuning and lower drop tunings in comparison? Well, that may be something for the future. We did have episodes where we also used the Mercury quite a lot for example, metal in the 70s and 80s, which we did. And I'm going to tell you a secret now. So I think I no longer need this in a proper setup, so I can change the position. This is my desk here, and yeah, quite need some cleanup, but this is the amp that I use every day for like practicing and playing. This is the AMP1 Mercury. So certainly I do love the Iridium. I really like that for metal tones, which is what I mostly do professionally, but the Mercury is something I use every day. I really like, and mainly because it takes pedals really well. So I have a couple of pedals that I really like using, and yeah, it's my go-to amp when I just want to play the guitar. So I love this amp. It can do metal, can do other things as well, and yeah, certainly we'll feature that in future episodes. Can't promise you when, but it's gonna come. All right, guys. Thanks for being with us tonight. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send us an email, to reach out to us on social media, wherever you want. And yeah, we have experts for blues tones, for metal tones, for all different kinds in the company. So I'm sure that we'll be able to help you. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next month on the next episode. And I'll leave you with an older demo of me testing the AMP1 Iridium when I got it. Well, not right when I got it, but it was something I did quite early when I first had the amp. That's it from me. See you next time. Have a nice one. Bye.